This is where the future begins. It's time to invest in our future. It's time to help our schools improve for the future. And it's time to give our educators what they need to innovate for the future, because the future of Texas is in our public schools.
Millions of Americans and their families who live in cities depend upon sound policies to help them lead longer, better lives in more vibrant communities. City Health, an initiative of the de Beaumont Foundation and Kaiser Permanente, provides urban leaders a set of policy recommendations that align with their city's priorities and needs.
This is where the future begins. It's time to invest in our future. It's time to help our schools improve for the future. And it's time to give our educators what they need to innovate for the future, because the future of Texas is in our public schools.
Millions of Americans and their families who live in cities depend upon sound policies to help them lead longer, better lives in more vibrant communities. City Health, an initiative of the de Beaumont Foundation and Kaiser Permanente, provides urban leaders a set of policy recommendations that align with their city's priorities and needs.
You want me to go? Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. If you're here in the audience, I'd like to ask you to please take your seats. We'll go ahead and get today's program started. I'd like to welcome you all that are here in person in Houston at the Wortham Theater Center, and also welcome everyone that is joining us over the internet for the live stream. My name is Michael Heckman, and I'm the president and CEO of Houston First Corporation. And for those of you who may not know, Houston First has a very broad mandate on behalf of the Houston region, the city of Houston. We are the destination marketing organization for the Houston region, TV and film, promotion, tourism, convention sales, major events. And we also manage some of the great assets that the city has, including today's venue that we have at the Wortham Theater Center, George R. Brown Convention Center, and many of the other finest facilities that we have here in Houston. You know, we take our responsibility very seriously to build value for our community and be able to tell Houston's story all over the world. In fact, if you hadn't heard, just within the last couple of weeks, Travel and Leisure magazine named Houston as one of the top 50 places to visit in the world in 2023, including one of only 4 big U.S. cities. We believe that's true, and we look forward to welcoming folks from all over the U.S. and from all over the world to Houston next month, the following months, and all of next year. You know, it's really great to have the opportunity to partner on today's event with the Texas Tribune. What an amazing organization and what amazing work that they continue to do. Personally, I can't think of a better person to have a sit down with than Mayor Sylvester Turner. The mayor, I have the privilege of being able to work very closely with on how we do our work on behalf of the city, and I can tell you that there is no one that has more energy, more passion, more enthusiasm, and puts more into his job than Mayor Turner. I'd also like to recognize my board of directors. We have some that are with us today, including our board chairman, David Mintzberg, who is here with us. David, thank you. Gerald Womack, who is also here. That board and their service to Houston allows us to do what we do as Houston First. I now have the opportunity to introduce Sewell Chan, who is the editor-in-chief of Texas Tribune. Now about a year in, Sewell joined the Tribune as editor-in-chief in October of 2021. Previously, he was deputy managing editor and then the editorial page editor at the Los Angeles Times, where he oversaw coverage awarded a Pulitzer Prize for editorial writing in 2021. He worked for the New York Times as well from 2004 to 2018 as a Metro reporter, Washington correspondent, deputy op-ed editor, and international news editor. He began his career as a local reporter at the Washington Post in 2000. Let's give a big Texas welcome to Sewell Chan.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Michael, for that warm welcome. I'm Sewell Chan, as you just heard, editor-in-chief of the Texas Tribune. Thank you for joining us today for our conversation with Houston Mayor Sylvester Turner. I'd like to thank members of Mayor Turner's staff, especially Bill Kelly and Mary Benton, for making this possible. I'd also like to acknowledge in this room the presence of Metro Board Chair Sanjay Ramabhadran, CEO Michael Heckman, from whom you just heard, and Chairman David Mintzberg of Houston First, Vice Mayor Pro Tem Castix Tatum, Council Members Gallegos and Kamen. Thank you all for coming today. I also want to acknowledge our sponsors who make this event possible. Our presenting sponsors of today's conversation are the Texas Municipal League and City Health. Our major sponsors, Raise Your Hand Texas, Locke Lord, Texas State Technical College, and today's host, of course, Houston First. Also special thanks to Holly Clapham, Pamela Powers, and Aaron Gonzalez from Houston First. Thank you. Some housekeeping notes. We will have about 45 minutes of Q&A between the mayor and myself. Then we'll have about 15 minutes for audience questions. As I'm sure all of you know, Mayor Turner was first elected as mayor in 2015 and re-elected in 2019 as Houston's 62nd mayor. He has led the city through challenges including budget deficits, homelessness, natural disasters such as Hurricane Harvey, and the pandemic, not to mention a certain blackout that occurred in early 2021. Before his election as mayor, Mr. Turner served for 27 years in the Texas House. He worked on the Appropriations Committee for 21 years and was Speaker pro tem for 3 terms. Mayor Turner, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, and welcome to Houston, Sewell.
Thank you, Mayor. So, Mayor, what were you up to this morning?
That's a good way to start it, too. I will tell you, I've been up since 3:30 this morning. Of course, we had a little water problem, so we were under a boil water notice. But I am pleased to say we're no longer under a boil water notice. So I want to give a lot of credit to Director Carol Haddock and our Public Works Department. They've been working around the clock. What I will say to the people who are here is that we pulled 29 water samples on yesterday morning to see whether or not there was any bacteria or contaminants. And I'm pleased to say that of those 29 samples, not one of them had any bacteria, any sort of contaminants. So quite frankly, for the city of Houston, the water has been good since day one. But there is a regulatory process that's put in place to protect the public safety. We went through the process. We tried to do it as quickly as we could. I certainly want to apologize to schools that had to close, businesses that were impacted, elective surgeries, for example, that had to be postponed. But I will tell you, as much as we rely heavily on equipment, every now and then that equipment will fail. So that's it. It's been an early morning, but it's good.
Mayor, the news comes as a great relief, of course, to more than 2 million Houstonians. If I could just press on a couple of things, though,
Sure.
that our readers would like to better understand. One is why did the backups not work in the first place, and what's being done on that level of the power backup to make sure that this kind of outage doesn't happen again?
That's one of the questions that I asked when they called me and told me that we had a power disruption, and that is we have worked to build in resilience. The East Water Purification Plant provides water to most of the city of Houston. And so I asked, did the backup generators, did they kick in? And what they said to me is that, Mayor, no. Number one, we had a transformer that malfunctioned. We had a backup transformer in case that would malfunction. The backup transformer also malfunctioned. That's a unique set of circumstances. And so the generators were not able to connect because the transformers were not working. Now, why they're not working, we'll have to make that determination. I will say to you that the electrical company was on site within 30 minutes. So the power was disrupted for 2 hours from 10:30 to 12:30. And I will say, of the 16 sensors that we had out there, really 21 sensors, 16 fell below what we call 20 PSIs. 14 of the 16 fell below for less than 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And then the other 2 were less than 30 minutes. But even with that, we went through the boil water notice. But why they malfunction, I don't know. I have ordered a diagnostic assessment to see exactly what happened and how can we mitigate it from happening in the future.
Now, Houston's relationship with the state is always a subject of great interest. With respect to TCEQ, was there some real discussion about whether or not this notice was required? Or is it automatic that even if you're down for a minute or 2 minutes, you've got to issue the notice?
I don't believe it's automatic. We were in conversations, for example, with TCEQ from 2:43 on Sunday up until about 6:40. Of course, the position that we have taken is that, number one, we've experienced these boil water notices before. When we had a 96-inch pipe that ruptured, okay, we went through the boil water notice, but the pressure was down for several hours. Okay, so that was understood. When during the winter storm Uri, the pressure was down for several days. So we understood having to do a boil water notice. In this particular case, you had 14 sensors who were slightly below the 20 PSI level, but for less than 2 minutes. And then you had 2 that were down below the 20 PSI for about 30 minutes. Yeah. And then the power was restored, and it was above 35 PSIs, which is where you want it to be for the rest of the day. The pressure was good pretty much the entire time. So it's not like we lost pressure throughout the system. So it rebounded very well. And so the question is, you know, in that particular case, with these particular circumstances, do you order a boil water notice or not? And you know, we can have an analytical conversation on that. But you know, this particular case was far different than the previous 2. Yep. Let me just leave it like that.
Did you feel pressure from TCEQ, or did you ultimately make this decision on your own?
Well, you know, it's a collaborative process, but you know, the state is the state. You know, you know, you consult with, you provide the data for a decision to be made, but in the end, the state will call it. Okay, and so. And
are you saying the state called it here?
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, you know, we have to adhere to what their requirements are. Now, the process is in place to protect the safety of people. Yeah. And so I think in the end, out of an abundance of caution, and I'm good with that, yeah. Out of an abundance of caution, you take the step to make sure that you're protecting the general well-being and the safety of the people in the public. And then, having said that, you want to work through that process as quickly as possible, because you do have schools being affected, businesses being affected, hospitals being affected, and this is the 4th largest city in the United States with 2.3 million people. So you have to move with the greatest degree of urgency and expediency in order to get things resolved and move forward. So at the end of the day, it was a great inconvenience for many, but I'm glad that we're at this point.
My final question before we move on to other topics, what about the communications? Now, you're telling us that, you know, there was a 4-hour discussion that really only ended after 6 p.m. So when the city finally made its first advisory at 6:44, that clearly was right after the decision had been made. Then, of course, Twitter, and then, of course, the text messages. Some Houstonians have asked, why was there time between the advisory and then the tweet and the text messages? Some are saying they only found out about the school closures from the school districts or from the news media.
Well, I would tell you that we followed the same protocol that we followed in the past in the previous 2 cases. Social media, we get it, we push things out. The press conferences, the press releases, we push things out. Getting it out to the various print and television, electronic media, we push those things out. I did instruct, for example, my director of Homeland Security to message and to get things out as well. But bear in mind, when this incident happened, you're talking about a 2-hour disruption, okay, where for most of your sensors, you were barely under the regulatory requirement for less than 2 minutes. So you really don't want to create a panic situation.
Right.
When the situation was not as dire as the previous situation in the past. And according to the state, for example, in the regulatory requirements, we have 24 hours from the time of the incident in order to provide notice. Okay, we provided notice far sooner than those 24 hours. And bear in mind, in this particular case, there was serious questions as to whether or not a boil water notice should be issued even in the first place. Because when you look now at the 29 samples that we pulled, all of the 29 samples were clear. So there was no bacteria, no contaminants. So you had to go through that process. It does take time to look at the data and to make an assessment. And in the end, in this particular case, at about 6:40, the decision was made out of an abundance of caution to issue the boil water notice, and then the notices went out. We can always do better, and we'll seek to do better in terms of communication.
Some have asked, why not use an Amber Alert style system to kind of get onto everyone's phones right away. Did you consider that kind of emergency?
Yes, with the WE system, in fact, I instructed my Chief of Homeland Security to do that. It did not go out nearly as soon as I would have liked for it to go out. So we are addressing that situation.
Mayor, actually, one communications question. If Twitter goes out, how is that going to affect local governments and the ability to reach out to people in cases like emergency management, public health, et cetera?
Well, if Twitter should go out, might be better. You know, things might get better. But
for our democracy, or for?
Well, let's put it this way. Things are good until they get bad. Okay, and what I mean by that, there are a lot of benefits to Twitter. There are a lot of benefits, but there are also a lot of negatives associated to it. And we are constantly confronting misinformation. So I was constantly, even on this water situation, constantly confronting misinformation that was put out and having to correct it. So Twitter has its benefits, but it also, I think that there's no sort of venue that shouldn't come with some set of rules in order to make sure that it is not more destructive than constructive. I am concerned with the direction in which Twitter is taken, because if you penetrate society with a lot of misinformation, then you're doing more harm than good.
And there are studies showing that misinformation travels 6 times faster.
Well, it does. And let me tell you, when people don't have to say things in front of you, it's easy to be anonymous and say whatever. So even on Twitter, for me, I don't read a lot of the comments below, because I know they don't mean it. I know they really love me, and you know, they just trying to get my attention. So I don't spend a lot of time reading all those things below. And then there are some people you see all the time, and you know, they're so negative. And you know, Twitter is good in terms of getting information out during events that needs to be disseminated very quickly. I recognize the benefits, but I also recognize that there are many people out there who would use it for destructive purposes, and we have to be mindful of that.
Mayor, earlier this month, Houston voters approved a whole package of bond measures. The success was pretty solid on all fronts. What impact will these 7 measures have on the city?
You know, they will be significant. You know, one of them dealt with public safety. That's the #1 priority of any mayor. I've got members of city council who are here. They understand the importance of public safety. So that's important. Parks and libraries always rate very highly. Quite frankly, you can never do and enhance enough parks. And same thing as it relates to libraries. There was one initiative dealt with bark. Okay, and we have a lot of stray animals in our system. People want to turn animals in, but we need the capacity. So we just have a lack of capacity. We need more, and so that measure was also on the ballot, and it also passed. And then solid waste. You know, people know about electricity, they know about water, and they know about their garbage. And when you drop the ball on any one or all 3, you will hear from people, and not just on Twitter.
Now, of course, in other parts of Texas, a number of bond and road and school construction measures failed. I was in West Texas recently where that's been a hard case to make. Do you think is the need for infrastructure investment becoming more clear?
I think so. Just for example, this is a growing city. Even, for example, within our water systems, infrastructure is critically important. And just like what happened in the last 2 days with our water system, we need to simply take a look and see what exactly was the cause for that failure, and whether or not the infrastructure needs to be enhanced. And quite frankly, that's in every segment of what we do. And the reality is, if we don't address infrastructure, there will be even more failures. If you don't make repairs on your home, sooner or later, something's going to break down, okay? And so we need more enhancements on our infrastructure to sustain our growth in terms of population and what's happening from an economic point of view. And that's why I do want to give a lot of credit to the Biden-Harris administration on the bipartisan infrastructure bill. It will be very, very beneficial for a city like the city of Houston, and it has already been beneficial for a city. The Inflation Reduction Act, very beneficial. So when you combine those two and then the CHIP bill, combine those three, then there are more dollars that are coming into our city to address infrastructure, and that will be very, very helpful.
How do you feel about the county's flood plan, which was updated a couple of years ago to try to emphasize equity and not just, the site of where the worst property damage will be? Do you think the county set the right balance?
I think equity is very important. That's a very big concern of mine, that you can't continue to overlook communities where there's been a lack of investments, where there are tremendous needs. So I do agree with that assessment. What is needed are more resources. Quite frankly, the CDBG MIT funding that came from the feds went down to the state, $4.3 billion. And then the state then allocated about $1 billion of that, $2 billion of that. Ultimately, the county ended up getting $750 million. The city didn't receive anything. Well, ultimately we ended up getting $9 million. That's not nearly enough. You can't really do a major infrastructure project with $9 million. So I agree with the county's assessment. There are social vulnerabilities measures, but we just need a lot more dollars flowing into the city and the county for infrastructure.
Now, Mayor, for most of the time you served in the Ledge, the Democrats were in the minority. And I don't think that was true when you first started your career there, but obviously by the late 90s, early aughts, it was starting to switch. You were known for having good relationships and abilities to work with people, from both parties. Has that relationship gotten more strained in recent years? The party that's in charge of the state, their base is really rural areas and to some extent the suburbs. Meanwhile, Texas's urban areas, and when I talk to people from outside of Texas, they're stunned to hear that nearly 90% of Texans live in urban areas, or that the majority of the state and the majority of its GDP, the majority of its prosperity, are generated in the Texas Triangle, and especially, of course, in Houston, Texas's largest city. Has that relationship gotten more strained?
Things are more difficult now than when I started as an elected official, even as a legislature, and even now as mayor. Things are a lot more extremes. I mean, those are the realities. Things are more extreme. And it's not about being conservative. You can be conservative, that's fine, not a problem. The question is when you become extreme, when you're operating on the shoulder of the road and not just in the right lane. And right now we have too many elected officials that are operating on the shoulder. And so it makes it very, very difficult to reach a consensus or to talk through or work through problems. When I was in the legislature, the biggest issue was urban versus rural. It wasn't even Democrat versus Republican. And then even when it became more partisan, there were times we could work things through. I'll never forget when I was in the legislature and I had a bill that I was having a hard time getting out of committee. And a friend of mine who was a Republican came to me and said, Sylvester, I think that's a good bill. And he said, do you mind whose name is on it? I said, hell, I just want the bill to get out. I just want the bill to pass. I don't care whose name is on it. So he said, hey man, why don't we do this? Let me file the same bill and put my name on it. And let's see what happens. I said, okay, fine. And so he did. My bill, same bill, nothing changed. His name was on it. He filed it, went to the committee passed it out. Got on the floor of the Texas House, and he was up at the front, and all of a sudden at the back mic, there were like 2 or 3 Democrats going to the back mic to challenge him on the bill. So I was sitting in my chair, I said, what the hell? So I got up. Bill Kelly can, he can understand this process. I got up out of my seat, And I walked to the back mic. And I said to the Democrats that were at the back mic asking him questions, I said, you know, this is a good bill. And they said, Sylvester, you familiar with it? You read it? I said, oh, yeah, I read. I said, I read this bill. This is a good bill. I support this bill. And they said, well, hey, well, if you're familiar with it, because, you know, we seeing who's carrying it. I said, yeah, ain't that something? He up there carrying this bill. But it happens to be a good bill. I don't know why in the hell he carrying it, but it's a good bill. And so they sat down. The bill passed unanimously. He then walks to me, shakes my hand, and said, let's get together for lunch. I said, no problem. That was in that day.
Yeah.
Things have changed since then. But relationships matter. I don't care who you are. I would tell anybody, relationships matter. And you have to find ways of being able to reach people, even when initially, politically, or philosophically, they may appear to be so far apart. And even as mayor, you still have to find ways to relate and to establish some sort of meaningful engagement with folk.
I believe it was Ted Kennedy who once said that there's no limit to what you can get done if you're willing to share all the credit.
Yeah, and that's very, very true.
Now, Mayor, let's talk a little bit about, we just had, of course, crucial midterm elections, but I want to focus here on Houston. The Kinder Institute's annual poll of Houstonians this year found that only about half of respondents, the lowest level recorded and a drop from 65% in 2017, said they think they'll be better off in the next few years. Now, coming from outside of Texas, I thought half are optimistic that they'll be better off in a few years. That's a high number. But this is clearly a very optimistic city, and so 50%, isn't as high as what it once was. What do you think are the causes of that?
I think when you're bombarded with such negativity, I think people kind of incorporate that into their own thinking. And we've been bombarded with so many negative things. I mean, people are attacking people from all different directions. And even when there are good ideas, people find ways to attack them. When things happen, people find ways to start blaming folk. Even when things, just in a natural course of events, they will happen. So when you're bombarded by negative things on a constant basis, then people start thinking things are bad. From my framework, for example, my mom always said tomorrow will be better than today. I still subscribe to that theory. Things happen, you just have to work through it. Cost of living may be high, you just keep working, and hopefully things will start to trend in a better direction. But even in a city, this is the fourth largest city. Michael Hedman just talked about we're in the top 50 cities in terms of people wanting to come to. I would tell you, when I came into office as mayor 7 years ago, pensions was the #1 financial issue. Pensions, $8.2 billion unfunded liability. Well, as of the end of last year, December, that had gone down to $1.49 billion, substantially different. We faced several disasters in the last 7 years, but we've been resilient. We were talking to Chairman of Houston First, David Mintzberg. This particular building was underwater from Hurricane Harvey. Today we're sitting here, with your box lunches, and having this particular event. So a lot of good, positive things have happened. And I think it's important to focus on the good and to recognize that tomorrow will be better. But if you allow all this negativity to get into your head and you just assume that things are just bad and nobody is any good, then it just becomes a part of your own thinking. So, hopefully people in the city of Houston will feel much, much better.
Let's talk about public safety for a moment. When I interviewed 3 police chiefs, the chiefs in San Antonio, Austin, and Houston at our Texas Tribune Festival a couple months back, one thing I clearly heard from them was a sense that the police do not always feel that the prosecutors are working in alignment with them. Is that a problem here in Houston?
See, now you're trying to drag me into. let me just say this. City of Houston, city council members, we support our police. Now that I can tell you without question. And we have funded our police in every single budget, in every single year since I've been mayor with this council. The budget has gone up and up and up. We try to be very focused and intentional on where we give our dollars. Where there's a need for overtime, we've done that. So from the city's perspective, we do support our police. But police can't do it alone. It's a collaborative effort. The community has to participate. Your prosecutorial wing has to participate as well. There are a number of criminals, for example, that are people that are out here who've committed some heinous crimes. You got to send them through the system. You got to get them prosecuted. Judges have to do their part in making sure that they're not rotating them out. The state has to do its part. There are way too many guns on the street for these criminals to get. And the state has made it very easy and accessible for guns. And so it's very frustrating. I'll tell everybody, for cities and counties, we're on the lower end. Water runs downhill. And if you create an environment where 16-year-olds and others can have guns without any training, without any licensing, when you start allowing 18-year-olds to have automatic weapons, okay, then you've created an environment that's conducive to more crime. And water flows downhill. And now it's up to people who live in these cities, people who live in these counties, police officers and prosecutors, to then fend off these persons that you've made it much easier for them to have guns and they shouldn't have them. So I don't point the finger at any one source, okay? Conservatives shouldn't point the finger at local leaders or Democrats, for example, and say they are soft on crime. I don't even know what that means. If you make it conducive for 16-year-olds and 18-year-olds to get guns, what in the hell you think they're gonna do with the guns? What do you think they're gonna do with them? And I will tell you that age group, and Janice, I'm sorry, did I say, I meant heck. I didn't mean that other word. You know, and that age group between 16 and 24, 16 and 26, that's the age group that is driving crime in so many cases. Domestic violence is another example. Red flag laws and all of these others, mental health funding. And people keep saying, Mayor, it's a mental health crisis. Okay, let's assume that to be the case. Then where is the mental health funding? The state of Texas now is sitting on the largest fund balance it has ever sat on in its history. Over $27 billion in its fund balance. The question is, since everybody keeps saying violence is related to mental health, how much of that $27 billion is going to be directed to mental health funding? And it should be a substantial transformative amount. So if you say that's the problem, then your checkbook ought to reflect what you say is the problem. And stop putting the blame on everybody else. So we shall see what happens in this legislative session.
Well, let's get to that. Yeah, of course, I've heard discussions about the fund balance, the surplus in other parts of the state where the attitudes are more like, well, that isn't really the state's money to spend. That's the taxpayers' money. And everything should come back in the form of property tax relief. Just saying this is what I'm hearing.
I don't even know how to respond to that. Let me say, it is all the taxpayers' money.
Yeah.
But as elected leaders, we are the trustees. Okay? And the point that I'm making, violence is a serious issue. Public safety is a serious issue. If you say mental health is the cause of many of these crimes, then you need, and the state of Texas has always been at the bottom, in that top, lower bottom, where we fund mental health, community health services. Well, if you have all of this surplus funding, I am sure that many of the people in this room, if not most, would say, spend a significant amount on addressing mental health issues. Spend a significant amount on addressing domestic violence and abuse. If you have this type of funding. Now, you can lower the property taxes, but let me just say to everybody, to many of these conservatives and others who talk about property taxes, when I was in the legislature, the state, when it comes to education, property taxes that fund education, the state assumes 60% of the cost of education. The local units of government assume 40%. Today, it is the reverse. The state of Texas assumes about 39% of the cost of education. They have shifted the cost on local units of government, and now they are having to assume about 61%. The state current leadership made the reversal. They pay less for education, and they are forcing local governments to pay more. And when you look at your tax bill, let me tell you where the greatest hit. It's on school property taxes. But the state is the one who shifted the responsibility. So now that they're sitting on $27 billion extra, yes, they ought to put more money into education and to lower the property taxes, but they also should be putting money on mental health, domestic violence, and quite frankly, they also need to pass Medicaid expansion so that more people can get more health care. Okay? Those are things that need to take place. And stop trying to shift the blame and working against local units of government.
Now, there's talk in the ledge, of course, about charter schools and even vouchers being a key part of the next legislative session. Well, as Houston's mayor, what would you like to see the ledge do and not do in the coming session?
And let me just say this. When you're not fully funding public education in the first place, okay, so now you want to take the taxpayers' dollars and put it on charter schools. Are you serious? Are you really serious? Let me tell you what that says to me. Most of the kids, nearly 5 million kids in the state of Texas, if not more, are what I call on the cruise ship. They're on the cruise ship. They're on the big ship. But the state is not fully funding those kids on the cruise ship. That's where most of our kids are. So instead of fully funding the kids on the cruise ship at 5 million, they're going to take some of the money that they have and put on these speedboats. But you're not saving the 5 million kids. You're now focusing on a small subset. But what about the kids, most of the kids on this cruise ship? That's where most of your kids are. What about the kids coming from communities that have been underserved and under-resourced? What about this diverse population of kids?
And the special ed kids.
And the special kids.
No.
What about them?
No.
So the state leadership is now talking about charter schools. But let me tell you who I think will pose as a roadblock to that. For schools in rural Texas, the school systems, the public school systems represent the engine in rural Texas. You close down or work against the public school system in rural Texas, you'll be hurting rural Texas. I don't think the Democrat or Republican legislators representing rural Texas are going to go along with that program. Ever since I was a legislator, they have said no. And quite frankly, I hope people in urban America don't assume that that is the right course to take. People need to invest in public education. Now, I don't have any problem with people choosing, to go someplace else if they have the means. That's fine. But I have seen how people have impacted public education, not invested in public education, not supporting them, and then stepping back and criticizing the end result when they didn't provide the necessary resources in the first place.
Mayor, you've got 13 months left in office. I'm assuming you've got that countdown clock that some elected officials, I think President Obama had one that marked down the time. What are your priorities for the next year?
Well, Vice Mayor Pro Tem Castick Tatum is here. I think Councilmember Abby Kamen is here. I think Councilmember Robert Gallegos is here. I don't know if there are any others here. They're all pushing me to put forth this COVID ordinance that would allow us to remain in for an extra 2 years because COVID, took up some of our time. The reality is that I'm not ready to leave. But I don't want to be like Trump either now. I mean, when I got to go, I got to go. Now, I'm leaving at 11:59. But over the next 13 months, look, what I would say is that I want us to finish with a bang and not a whimper. I want us to go out strong. There are a number of projects council members have, I know I have, that I want us to get done. I don't know who the next mayor will be, but I do know we have 13 months to get a lot of stuff done. I've got 22 parks that we're working to revitalize across this city. I want them to get done. Alameda Multi-Service Center, Sunnyside Multi-Service Center, we'll cut the ribbon on that. I want them to get done. So there are a number of infrastructure projects I want us to move forward on. It is important for us to build a more resilient city, so I want us to move forward on those fronts. There are a number of priorities and projects that I have on my board, so to speak, that I want us to be able to check the box on.
What are some of them?
Well, some I've mentioned already, and then even as it relates to cleaning up our city, that's important. Illegal dumping still is a major concern. My Complete Communities Initiative, I thought I saw Director Shannon Buggs walk in. There she is. That's a major initiative. We won't get all of that done while I am mayor of the next 13 months because you can't finish that. That's a very aspirational initiative. But it is investing resources in communities that have been underserved and under-resourced. And what I've said to Shannon and others, I want us to push as hard as we can to get resources in these communities and to get projects done in these communities while I am still here. So there are a number of those projects in each one of these areas that we have identified that we want to get done. So, I want us to finish with a bang. And then in the last 6 months, my goal is to have the mayor's farewell to the city of Houston. Every month we're gonna have a major event where I'm saying farewell. It's gonna be a 6-month farewell party. Yeah, I gotta connect with Houston first, because they are on the marketing end, But look, this is an energetic, kinetic sort of city. And the vibe is good. And it's important, I think, that we celebrate that and we keep it going. But I will say, I want us to set the bar very high, and then the next mayor that comes in will have to build on top. That's my goal.
Fantastic. It's going to be a long goodbye.
Yeah, time comes and goes so very quickly.
Now, Mayor, very true. Now, Mayor, several folks have already announced their intention to run, including former Harris County Clerk Chris Hollins, former Councilwoman Amanda Edwards, business owner Lee Kaplan, and today, I believe, State Senator John Whitmire. whom of course you have worked with closely. Do you intend to make an endorsement? And if so, do you have a timetable?
Can you believe that these people have announced that they're running for mayor while I'm still mayor? I mean, that is so disrespectful. They could have at least waited until next year. They are already running. And then, I'll be waiting for the question, well, what would you do that the mayor hadn't done? Or how can you do things better? And then I'll be listening very carefully. Say, let them criticize me if they want to. Whoever criticizes me, I ain't helping you at all, But no, I mean, it's good to see people running and interested, and I'm sure that there will be more getting into the fray. Look, I'm gonna let them do what they do. You all hired me for 2 terms, 8 years. I've got 13 months left on my job. I intend to focus on my job and completing my job for the next 13 months. The people who are running for mayor, they'll have an opportunity once I'm out.
Now, Mayor, if I'm not mistaken, you recently said that you might have 1 office left in you, that you may not be done yet. Now, I'm assuming you're speaking about the presidency of the United States.
Nah, I don't want that job. I don't want that job. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know. I really thought that by now I would be ready to say, been there, done that, thank you so very much. Look, it's just, it's been a joy, it continues to be a joy. It's gratifying. I don't know what the step will be, what the next step will be. So I'll leave that open. But I'll continue to serve, in some capacity. So I'll continue to do that. But in terms of whether or not there's another elective office out there for me, I don't know. If you ask me 1 week, I say yes. You ask me another week, I say no. Do I want to return to the practice of law? Yeah, not necessarily. Do I want to go and teach someplace? I don't know. I'm waiting for Oprah to call me. Oprah, you out there? 713-569.
Well, Oprah gets me to my next question, which is, you've said you're working on a book.
2.
Tell us about them.
The first one is more autobiographical in nature. It doesn't talk about the mayor's race of the city, and the mayor's race at all. It more focuses on events, circumstances, people that have helped to shape my philosophy. And it talks a lot about the legislature, what I learned from the legislature spends a lot on relationships. But it's more when I focus on events or things, the circumstances that have happened that have caused me to think the way I think, okay? One of the reasons, for example, in the book, I'm very pro on schools, and I'm very resistant to the closing of schools because I grew up in Acres Home, and the school district shut down my elementary and junior high school, sold the property to a cemetery. So when you go to Paradise Cemetery, that's my old elementary, junior high. And then they bused us 18 miles one way, 36 miles. So I graduated from Klein. So I spent a lot of time on that and the impact that it had. So that's the first one, more autobiographical, but what makes you think, what makes you tick. And then I focus on, for example, on a kid by the name of Antoine, whose mother came to called my legislative office. Son was suffering with cancer. He was 14 years old, and he couldn't get enrolled in the Children's Health Insurance Program because it was like a 6-month enrollment, and there were a lot of barriers. My legislative team ended up taking that case up, trying to help him to get enrolled. But by the time we got him with insurance through this Children's Health Insurance Program, the cancer was so advanced, and then he ended up dying. And so I went back and spoke at the funeral, and I told his mom and his sisters and brothers, I'm heading back to the legislature. I want to change this rule. And so went back and championed this bill to expand CHIP to a 12-month enrollment, to eliminate a lot of these barriers. Got 2 Republicans to author with me. And I'll never forget, in that case, the speaker, conservative Republican speaker, but someone, at that time I built a relationship with, said, Sylvester, you'll never get the Republicans to pass this bill on the floor of Texas. I told him, if you stand down, let me do what I do. But if you stand down. So he said, okay, I stand down, but they're not going to pass it. Well, with 2 Republicans, 3 Democrats, including myself, we got it at the committee. For 5 hours, we stood on the floor. We had a pact that we made that if Democrats came and they wanted to broaden it, we would say no. You can't sacrifice the good seeking the perfect. If Republicans came trying to narrow the scope, the Republicans would stand and we would say no. You can't sacrifice the good seeking the perfect. And at the end of the day, 64 Democrats and 62 Republicans voted for it, went over to the Senate, eventually passed, and then the governor at the time ended up signing it. So it did happen, and a lot more kids got insurance. So I focus on things like that in the book. In the second one, it deals with me as mayor. And the focus is leadership under major crisis. Yeah. And we've had many of those. And so it focuses heavily on that. So those are the 2 books that I'm working on, and I'm looking forward to getting them done.
Now, I invite members of the audience who have questions for the mayor to please use one of the 2 mics. While you're doing so, please don't be shy. One more question for you, Mayor. You've been quite outspoken, really starting quite recently, about your battle with cancer, which thankfully you're in very, very good health, and we're really, really grateful that you're here with us. Why did it take you a while before you felt comfortable, talking about it, even to the point where your daughter didn't find out until the interview that you gave?
Well, I mean, the reality is that, my daughter didn't know I was going to talk about it publicly until I did. She knew, but she didn't know I was going to discuss it publicly. And quite frankly, I hadn't planned on discussing it.
Well, she knew you had a growth, but you had not said cancer, I believe.
Well, initially I said growth, but eventually I ended up telling her that it was cancerous. But in terms of making it public, I didn't tell her I was going to make it public until I made it public. And I didn't intend to do that. It was just, we were sitting down and we were talking about resilience. And, it's one thing to talk about storms and extreme weather events, but resilience comes in many forms. Yeah. And there is personal resilience. Yeah. But the elements are the same, whether you're dealing with a storm or you're dealing with a personal challenge. And in the end, for example, I simply said to myself, leaders lead in many different areas. And sometimes what you go through is just not intended for yourself. Sometimes what you go through is intended to share with someone else, no matter how personal it may be. But you choose your own timing. I can't tell you when to tell your story. You can't tell me when to tell mine. But there comes a certain moment where you say, okay, I'm comfortable and let's discuss it. And cancer is one of those things that, I think everybody in this room knows of someone who's experienced it, gone through it. And it's something that I experienced. I thought it was a toothache at the time. It ended up being more. And quite frankly, you continue. Doctors monitor you closely. But I thought at that point in time, it was worth telling the story. I think also people need to recognize that people in elective office are human just like you. Sometimes when people look at elected officials, it's like we're not human. and we don't have a heart, and we don't have pain, and we don't have families, and they just treat us as if there's no life in us. But as elected officials, we experience oftentimes the same things that everybody else experiences. We are not immune from sickness. And in this case, we are not immune from cancer. We are not. And it is important to help people on how to deal with their personal challenges. Okay? That's important, because there are a lot of people who are in their homes or in their cars or in their offices, and you see them and they're smiling at you and they're engaged in a conversation with you, but you don't know their story. You don't know what they're going through. Now, they are mustering up everything to show you their best, but that takes a lot of energy. Okay, so for me, what I decided is that, okay, let me share my story. And you never say one and done, but you deal with it one day at a time. But you also have to recognize that you're not alone on this journey. And so that was my point. That's why I discussed it. And we still work through it.
Any questions for the mayor? If not, I can wrap up, but please, go right ahead.
Dr. Thompson Aqua, the Chief Editor of Health and Development Magazine. Mayor Sylvester Turner, thank you for confirming my books, because I'm basically also writing 2 books about you and your administration. And I was thinking about an autobiographical book and another on incident and leadership, and apparently you just stole my books. Congratulations. I've covered you for 2 times and we are coming to the end. Before I started covering you, I had worked in Washington, D.C., Baltimore, and New York with the World Bank, United Nations.
What's your question,
sir?
So
the question is coming from this brief background. Basically, you've done very well managing the incidents and all of those other things. But internationally, apparently, you seem to have wanted to put your feet and test the international grounds, because you invited the presidents of African nations to an energy forum. And apparently, it's just one president who came or so. So I want to ask, was it something you didn't think well and plan well? Why did the presidents not come? Are you discouraged in that area? Do you intend to continue? What are you going to do in that area in relationship with the international leadership and community, especially with Africans? Thank you.
Did you invite some African presidents to an event?
Oh, did I invite some African presidents to a particular event? Oh, for the energy summit. Yeah, we had our first African Energy Summit in September, when we had a number of ministers of energy from the African countries and ambassadors there. The president of Niger was also present. That was the first. We are planning the second African Energy Summit next year, somewhere around September. And the invitation is to invite the heads of state of those 56 African countries here to the city of Houston. I'm very excited about that. And my mayor's office of International Trade Affairs, Master Denon, is taking the leadership, and Chris Olsen taking the leadership on that. So that's coming up next year. I'm very excited about that.
Thank you, Mayor. A final question.
Hi, Mayor. Tanya McConney Rivera with AT&T. I wanted to take an opportunity to ask you, I know that the City of Houston is going to be looking to expand broadband in the City of Houston. And being in this role for the last year, I've really seen that there are digital equity issues, digital literacy. There are people that don't know how to turn on a computer. They don't know how to use a mouse. They haven't adopted the internet because the work that they do just doesn't even allow them to see that it's a need. Can you talk a little bit about what your vision is with expanding broadband and adoption of the internet within our community?
Yeah, we've had several. There are a lot of a lack of connection throughout the city of Houston, especially in those communities that I've identified as a part of complete communities. We are now working with my IT department, working with complete communities, working with government affairs. We are assessing where those gaps are, and there are many in the city of Houston. And then there are a lot of federal dollars that are flowing down. So we want to take full advantage of those federal dollars. I think it's the FCC, if I'm not mistaken, that's already done some mapping of areas where the connection where there's a lack of connection in terms of broadband. But a lot of these dollars are flowing through the state. So we want to put ourselves in the best position to pull down those dollars. We are putting out an RFP, if we have not already done it, and inviting companies to come forth with their ideas and plans, how we can address these lack of connections within our city, and work with us in pulling down these dollars and utilizing them to make sure that communities are connected. But I'm really focused on those 10 complete communities that are in the city of Houston.
With that, we are out of time. Thank you, Mayor Turner, for taking the time to share with us your insights with great grace and even humor. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you as well to the Texas Tribune members who tuned in today. The support of our members keeps events like this one free and accessible for all. If you value our events, please donate and join as a member of the Tribune at texastribune.org/give. Thank you, everyone. Thank you again, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Sewell. Thank you.